When castaways are discovered, it's usually revealed that their stories are even better than the fictional accounts we read or see in movies. In fact, it's usually these real people that inspire the legends. So today, here at Unexplained Mysteries, we'll be taking a look at 3 people and their survival stories after being isolated. US Navy discover people on an island after seeing help sign. Despite what films may have you believe, a set of castaways is rarely rescued by spelling help with palm leaves. In fact, when Navy Lieutenant Commander John Harkins encountered this situation in 2016, he said that neither he nor anybody else in his community had ever seen anything like it. What the US Navy had discovered were 3 men who had been missing after failing to show up at a Micronesian island. A wave had overtaken their boat while they were travelling. Luckily, they all had life jackets and survived by swimming to a deserted island. After 3 days of fending for themselves, a US Navy plane saw their collection of palm leaves that signalled help. They also saw a heat signal on an infrared camera from a signal fire, which originally inspired them to fly closer to the island. The men caught sight of the plane and started waving their orange life jackets. The men on the plane identified the island as Fanadik, which is located hundreds of miles north of Papua New Guinea. The plane approached this island several times and used a smoke marker to let the men know they'd been spotted. The men on the plane celebrated their discovery that the castaways responsible for the help sign were still alive. A small local ship was called in to complete the rescue, and they ended up unscathed. Alexander Selkirk, who survived 4 years and 4 months at sea. Alexander Selkirk is one of the most famous cases of a real-life survival story, inspiring popular fiction. Selkirk, born 1676, started as a wayward youth growing up in Lower Largo. He found himself in trouble over poor church behaviour and beating up his brother. However, his dreams of going off to sea were supported by his mother. He joined buccaneering voyages in the South Pacific and eventually ended up on the vessel Cinque Ports with a group of privateers. These people were legalised pirates, captained by Thomas Stradling under the command of William Dampier. Soon, Stradling abandoned Dampier and took full control of the ship. When the ship stopped at an uninhabited island, Selkirk decided it was safer to stay there. He had noticed the ship was worm-eaten, full of disease and leaking. Stradling delighted in the idea of abandoning Selkirk and left him on the island with a musket, hatchet, knife, cooking pot, bedding and clothes. Selkirk begged to reboard the ship, realising not one of the crew members was going to join him, but Stradling didn't let him. While the captain assumed that Selkirk was going to endure the worst fate, the crew that had abandoned him eventually suffered from a loss of their ship. Not all of the crew members survived, and those who did surrendered to the Spanish and were imprisoned. Meanwhile, Selkirk lived along the shoreline. He ate lobsters and spent his time wallowing in loneliness. He also spent a lot of time evading Spanish ships. As a Scotsman and privateer, they would surely take him as a captive. Despite his caution, he at one point was spotted by Spanish sailors. Selkirk hid in a tree and wasn't noticed, despite the group standing right under him. The sailors gave up and returned to their vessel. Sea lions eventually drove him inland. He was able to get meat and milk from goats left over by earlier sailors. He also foraged for other food sources. Selkirk dressed himself in goat skins. The castaway was able to protect himself from the rats that attacked at night by domesticating nearby cats. Overall, he demonstrated impressive survival skills. He made a knife out of the barrel hoops left on the beach. He constructed 2 huts from pepper trees. Eventually he ran out of gunpowder but was able to chase his prey on foot. This was mostly successful, but led to an injury after he tumbled from a cliff. Though he couldn't move for a day, his fall was cushioned by his prey, preventing a broken back. His feet were so calloused from this hunting that he didn't need shoes. When he wasn't focused on basic survival, Selkirk spent time singing psalms and reading the Bible. Overall, life on the island passed by with less trouble than one would expect. This island would later be renamed Robinson Crusoe Island in 1996, after Selkirk was later connected to that fictional character. His long-awaited rescue came 4 years and 4 months later. This was when the Duke, a ship piloted by William Dampier, arrived on the island. He'd spent so much time alone that he'd practically forgotten his language. Soon Selkirk was privateering again. He returned to his normal self, getting himself in trouble and landing in prison for 2 years. He married twice, enlisted in the Royal Navy, and eventually passed away of yellow fever during a voyage. He was buried at sea. Before he passed away, his fellow crew member Edward Cook popularised Selkirk's adventures in his book called A Voyage to the South Sea and Round the World. His story also inspired Daniel Defoe's famous character Robinson Crusoe. This was in his story published in 1719, The Life and Surprising Adventures of Robinson Crusoe. The connection was made clear through the character's appearance. He was depicted as dressed in goatskin like Selkirk, despite residing in the Caribbean. Defoe likely met Selkirk himself after he was rescued. Defoe's piece gained a lot of fame, was translated into many languages, and is often recognised as the first English novel. Selkirk has inspired other authors, such as William Cowper, Charles Dickens, and Patrick Kavanagh. A movie detailing his life premiered in South America and was distributed by the Walt Disney Company. Selkirk clearly left quite a legacy. Tom Neal, who survived 16 years. In 1952, Tom Neal found himself a castaway by no accident. After travelling the South Pacific for almost 30 years, Neal decided to live his life in isolation on a completely uninhabited coral atoll. This was in the Cook Islands. He lived there 3 different times for a span of 16 years. This adventure was inspired by American travel writer Robert Frisbee, who'd met Neal and told him about the time he had spent on the island. Later, in his autobiography, Neal explained, "I chose to live in the Pacific Islands because life there moves at a sort of pace which you feel God must have had in his mind originally when he made the sun to keep us warm and provided the fruits of the earth for the taking." When Neal arrived on the island, he claimed a beaten-up shack left from the coast watchers during World War II as his home. He brought with him food tins, tools, seeds, and some paperbacks. He was also accompanied by 2 cats. He repaired the shack and took up hunting, fishing, and gardening. When the sun began to set, he took his spot atop a wooden box on the beach to watch the sky and drink tea. While his life sounded idyllic, it wasn't all enjoyable. Neal dreaded taking the life of 6 pigs who were ruining his garden. He buried them instead of eating them. He spent 6 months building up a pier with coral stones, but it was destroyed in a major storm. After this, things took a turn for the worst. Neal ran out of nicotine and quickly started experiencing withdrawal. One day, he was casting an anchor on the beach when he injured his back so severely he could hardly move. It took him 4 hours to drag himself back to his shack, where he fell in and out of consciousness. Luckily, 2 men who were making a stop at the island found him, helped him recover, and sent a ship for him. The ship arrived 2 weeks later and took him back to his original home. Returning to civilization wasn't easy for him though. The fast, crowded and restricted lifestyle caused massive discomfort. Neal begged for permission to return to the island. However, the government forbade it, not wanting to be responsible for him. He married and had 2 children and took a job in a warehouse. He spent 6 years living a normal life before a friend took him on their boat back to the island. Then, he spent another 2.5 years on the island. Ultimately, he became tired of the pearl divers interrupting his solitude. He took a 3-year break back home and wrote his autobiography, An Island to Oneself. The profits from the book funded his final stay. He returned to his island and stayed there for an entire decade. The fame generated by his writings caused him to receive constant fan mail. He lived for a few months with a couple and their daughter, when their yacht was hit by a squall, sending their boat foundering on a reef. They were then rescued by a passing ship. In 1977, after suffering from stomach cancer, he was taken back to his home, so he didn't have to pass away alone and could receive medical assistance. He passed away there 8 months later at age 75. The islands he lived on are now protected as a national park. No matter how someone finds himself to be discovered at sea, it seems survival always leads to formative experiences, a fascinating legacy, and stories told for years to come. So what do you make of these interesting survival stories? Be sure to let us know your thoughts in the comment section below and help us by growing this community whilst working to solve these unexplained mysteries. Thank you for watching and don't forget to subscribe for more videos.